be practicing, as it's our practice session, we'll be practicing the second part of the listening section, right? Which is TOEFL lectures, right? We've already seen TOEFL conversations. So please be ready to take notes. We will be listening to different lectures, answering questions about them, and practicing in general. Do you guys have any questions before we start?
Hello, good evening. I have a question about the material or the access to the Magoosh platform. Until what date are we going to have access?
Well, I mean, I am not sure about that. You will for sure have access to the Margush platform until your course is over. But to be honest, you probably have access like, I don't know, 1 year from now, 2 years. I couldn't tell you because they won't change the password. They are really unlikely to change the password. We've had the same password for about like this whole year now. So you're probably gonna be able to access it until like late this year, unless they change the password, right? But ideally, I mean, technically, as long as this course, like during the duration of the course, you will have access to the material. Now, I'm gonna ask though, because that's actually a good question. I'm gonna ask the coordinator if like they give access to this platform for students, like for how long, right? I don't know if they change the how often they change the password. But be sure that you can have access to it and the password won't be changed at least this year. So that's what I could tell you. But I will ask and I'll let you guys know next class or through the WhatsApp chat maybe.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions before we start? Okay, guys. So get ready to take notes. I'm gonna play the lecture now. Pay attention, take some notes. Remember to focus mainly on paying attention to the big ideas and to write down the details that you hear, right? So I know that it's tough, it requires practice, but it's important that you do both at the same time. You're not either too focused on your notes that you forget about like being present and understanding the main ideas, or same thing the other way around, right? You're not too focused on understanding that you forget taking notes. So let's create a balance. I'm gonna play the lecture now. Let's go.
Listen to part of a lecture from a life sciences class. Raise your hand if you're right-handed. Yep, that looks typical. Most of us, about 90%, are right-handed. It's been that way throughout history. In nearly every culture, right has been associated with positive qualities, while the left has been associated with negative, or even evil ones. In Latin, left means sinister. In ancient Japan, men could reject or refuse to marry women who were left-handed. In modern China, teachers try to force left-handed students to learn to write with their right hands. And, as I'm sure all lefties know, everyday items like can openers, scissors, computer keyboards are designed for righties. In short, left-handers have been made to feel left out. Get it? It might seem straightforward to you and I, but scientifically speaking, the basis of handedness is not well understood. Most scientists define right-handed or left-handed on the basis of a person's preferred writing hand. But some scientists claim it should be based on the hand that is faster and more accurate in performing manual activities like tightening a screw or tying a knot. Still others claim that ability doesn't matter. In other words, that handedness should denote only preference. Yes, question.
What about people who are who use both hands?
You mean ambidextrous. Actually, most scientists agree that genuine ambidexterity is rare, and several of them believe it even rates its own special category as a distinct type of handedness. The reason for this is that most people can perform several functions relatively equal with either hand, which causes another scientific fraction to argue that there are actually only two types of handedness, right and non-right. This group advocates measuring handedness on a continuum from 100% right-handed to 100% left-handed. On this scale, we'd say something like, I'm 60% right-handed, or I'm 82.5% right-handed. Though how we'd determine who's more right-handed than another would open up a whole new can of worms. Okay, yes.
How do people become right-handed or left-handed in the first place? Does it come from your genes?
Mostly, yes. Research shows that handedness is largely genetic. Interestingly, though, even when both parents are left-handed, the odds are no better than 50-50 that their children will be lefties. Some scientists believe there is a specific gene that determines right-handedness, but the trouble is that they can't pinpoint it. They think this gene also aids in development of speech and language comprehension. Many researchers believe that handedness is a result of something called brain lateralization, which is the concept that each hemisphere of the brain controls different bodily functions. Researchers have long been believed that a person's dominant hand is on the opposite side of the brain hemisphere that controls their language specialization, so that right-handed people use the left half of their brain for processing language. But brain lateralization is not well documented, and there is evidence that seems to contradict this concept. For instance, while it's true that more than 90% of right-handed people do process language in their left hemisphere, recent research shows that about 40% of left-handed people also process language primarily in the left side of their brain. Additionally, only 10% of lefties rely primarily on their right brain to process language. So, what can we make of this? Though genetics clearly play a vital role in determining handedness, environment also seems to be an important factor. A recent archaeological study compared a group of modern Canadians with 1,000-year-old skeletons from a British farming community. The Canadians showed right-handed dominance by a 9-to-1 ratio of larger right elbows than left ones. In the ancient skeletons, however, most right and left elbows were equal. Now, this doesn't prove that the British farmers were ambidextrous, but researchers say it does suggest that handedness can be subject to societal influence. So for many, the best hypothesis at this time is that handedness results from a complex interaction of nature and nurture.
Okay. Now let's see what the questions are. So, our first question. Elizabeth, please, can you read the question?
Okay. What is the main topic of the lecture?
Okay. What do you guys think? What option would you choose?
I think letter D.
Yes, do you guys agree? Okay, guys. So yes, I do agree with you. Because even though in the lecture they talked about all of the previous things, they do define what handedness is, they do talk about the right-handed dominance, they talked about the genetics part, but we need an option that encompasses everything in the lecture, right? Included the genetics, included the dominance, included the definition. So as a whole, we could say that yes, it's about the scientific basis of handedness, the science behind handedness, right? So totally option D. Now the second question says, why does the professor mention Japan and China? So look at your notes. What do you guys think?
Letter C.
Okay. Do you guys agree? Do you guys agree? Do you all agree that it's C? Well, what about the rest? Okay. So yeah, I do agree because they mentioned Japan and China in the beginning of the lecture, right? When they were talking about how left-handed people have been somehow excluded from society or have been like throughout history been forced to become right-handed, right? Or to write with the right hand. So those are prejudices, right? These are examples of handedness prejudices. It was mentioned in the beginning of the lecture. Now, question 3 says, according to the professor, what is the problem with the concept of brain lateralization? What do you guys think? Which one? What is the problem with the concept of brain lateralization? Take a look at your notes. If you have anything about problems, anything about this concept of brain lateralization, anything about the options that you have, you can maybe try to connect the dots. So what do you guys think?
Letter D.
Okay. Do you all agree that it's D? So yes, I do remember that this concept was mentioned when they were talking about what determines handedness, right? I think a student raised the question of, so what makes a person right-handed or left-handed or ambidextrous? And well, the professor explained this problem, right? So the problem is that it doesn't apply to determining handedness. And if you just take a look at the options, you will notice that, for example, we could eliminate options A and options B because they are not really problems, right? And they don't make sense in this context of looking for a problem with this concept. The only problems, possible problems, would be that it has been disproven, the concept has been disproven, or that it doesn't apply to determine handedness. In this case, the archaeological study, I think, was mentioned way later in the lecture, so it is totally D. Great, great, Tricia. Now, question 4 says, why does the professor say this? Get it? I'm going to play back that part. Let's see.
Left-handers have been made to feel left out. Get it? Left-handers have been made to feel left out. Get it?
Okay, so why does the professor say get it?
Letter B.
Okay, do you guys agree? He wants to direct students' attention to a pun. Okay, what's a pun?
It's like the part of a joke.
Exactly. So it's a joke, right? So it's a game of words. And he made a joke. He said that left-handers have been made to feel left out. So he's playing with the word left. And when he says get it and he laughs, it's because he wants to like kind of direct students' attention to that joke that he made. Exactly. So yes, great. And finally, question 5 says, in the lecture, the professor mentions problems scientists have in determining handedness. Indicate which of the following statements is true. So again, we're talking about problems that scientists have in determining handedness. So what is a problem? What would you guys say?
Maybe letter A.
Okay. Some scientists claim the only handedness is right and unright. So I do agree that option A seems very logical. I think it could be the one. Because if we're looking at problems, then, for example, options C and D don't really make sense, right? Because, I'm sorry, options B and D don't make sense, right? Because most scientists define handedness by manual performance accuracy. How would that be a problem, right? First of all, it's not related to determining handedness or to know what determines handedness. And second, if most scientists agree on something, why would that be a problem? And same thing for option D, right? If 90% of left-handers process language in their left side of the brain, then that would actually kind of solve that would solve the problem, right? That would be what determines handedness. So yes, and I do agree that it's A because, because of the information is correct, and also because it makes sense, right? If some scientists claim something, then and other scientists claim something else, then they don't agree, right? They have problems coming to an agreement. And it was related to the fact that like ambidextrous people are sometimes not recognized as ambidextrous, right? And that's the problem. So yes. Let's check our answers. So the first one is correct. It's the scientific basis of handedness. Second one is also good. These are examples of handedness prejudices. The third one is perfect as well. It doesn't determine handedness. He wants to direct students' attention to a pan, and some scientists claim the only handedness is right and not right. So great. Congratulations, Christian. So you are the one that pretty much answered all of them. Well done. What about the rest? What happened, guys? Nobody else said anything. So tell me, what is it that you guys are struggling on? Was it too fast? Were your notes not enough? Was it the vocabulary? Was it the speed? Was it the length of the lecture? What was it, guys? What would you say? No comments, really? What happens? Why are you guys saying anything? Alejandra, in your case, what did you find the most difficult part was?
The teacher, I used the right from word. That's why I didn't listen to the lecture. That's why I couldn't answer.
I'm sorry, Alejandra?
I just arrived from my work, so I couldn't pay attention or start from the beginning of the class, so I didn't hear the lecture.
Okay, Alejandra, that's fine. Elizabeth, what about you? What about you? What was the problem?
I think I need to expand my vocabulary, and I still have trouble understanding several words.
All right, so vocabulary. Yes, maybe you guys need to work on your academic vocabulary, right? A lot of words were, not all of them were scientifically related, not as much as one would expect. So it is obviously always a good idea to expand vocabulary, but maybe you're getting confused and maybe it was something else as well, right? Maybe it was the speed in which you were listening to the lecture. So maybe you could practice listening to different types of lectures at different speeds. So try to see exactly what it is. Because the vocabulary that I wouldn't say that it was too technical. Well, in my opinion, right? I don't know if it was too technical for you guys. But if you felt that it was, then maybe, yes, you should be working on your vocabulary. And Micaela, what about you?
The vocabulary too.
Vocabulary. Okay. Let's take a look at the transcript. Because if the problem is vocabulary, let's see what type of words we have here in this lecture. So, I mean, obviously the technical words here would be right-handed, left-handed, right? So remember that in order sometimes to understand words, you need to think of the roots of the word. So you know what hand is, and you know what right is, right? So right hand means right hand is your right hand, and right-handed, this is a suffix, ed, that is basically an adjective, right? So for example, you are, I don't know, something could be tiring, or you could be tired, right? That ed, basically means it's an adjective, right? Something is of your interest, or you could be interested. So that ed at the end basically means an adjective for describing something. So when you say right-handed, is the adjective used for people who use the right hand. So maybe that was the technical vocabulary, right-handed, left-handed, handedness. Look at how from one word, hand, if you add suffixes and prefixes, you can come up with so many other words, right? The word hand, you know what it is. So it could be right-handed, left-handed, handedness. So this is another suffix. And basically ness, it means it's a noun. It's not an adjective anymore, it's a noun. So for example, you have nouns like laziness, right? Craziness, cleverness. All of those have the same suffix, ness. So one way to quickly expand your vocabulary, one tip that I can give you guys, is learn suffixes, prefixes, and the roots of the words. Because just by knowing that this ness is just a noun, then you are gonna learn a lot more words, right? You know that lazy is an adjective, laziness is a noun. So learn different prefixes, different suffixes. That's a quick way of expanding your vocabulary. What else do we have? We have percentages. So that is very, that is scientific vocabulary, maybe in a way. What else do we have? Like accurate, perform. maybe those are scientific words, but not really, right? Research, genetic. So yes, we have some scientific words, right? Genetic, research, scientists. I don't know, like process, the left hemisphere, brain, documented evidence, ambidextrous. But most of the vocabulary that's technical, for example, the word ambidextrous, you're not required to know what it is, right? But they explain it. They say, what about people who are who use both hands? And then the professor says, you mean ambidextrous. So even though you don't know this technical word, they explain what it is in the same lecture, right? So yes, maybe you do have to expand your vocabulary a little bit, try to study suffixes, prefixes, and obviously words referred to or words used in the scientific context. But it was over. Anything else? Any questions before we do another one? This one is also related to the science, so it would be good for improving your vocabulary as well. Let's see. Please get ready to take notes. I'm going to play.
Listen to part of a university lecture on animal behavior by a professor of biology. We're looking at animal behavior this week, and let's turn now, class, to one of its most dramatic manifestations, animal mimicry. Organisms that are good to eat or that are attacked for other reasons often develop devices, through evolution of course, techniques and devices to protect themselves from their attackers in order to survive and in order to reproduce and pass their genes on to the next generation. And one of these techniques, one of these strategies, is to look like something else, to look like something that is not good to eat, or something that is otherwise of no interest to the predator. An organism that does this, that resembles something else, is called a mimic. And the thing that it has evolved to resemble is called the model, while the predator that it is trying to mislead is called the recipient, the one that receives the misleading image. Some mimics do this by adopting camouflage, which is a cryptic resemblance to something of no interest to its enemy. And by doing this, they become invisible. They are hidden. Many animals, insects, lizards, amphibians, mimic the abundant plant life in the habitat around them. I'm sure that you've seen green grasshoppers and brown moths that seem to be well hidden on grass stems and tree trunks when they're motionless. But the leaf-tailed gecko, a small lizard in Madagascar, is a master at this. It avoids its enemies by looking exactly like a cluster of old dead leaves. And there are various species of katydids, grasshopper-like insects that have managed to duplicate the appearance of leaves with startling accuracy. In all stages of growth, some species looking like fresh green leaves and others looking like old decaying leaves, complete with leaf veins, weathered edges, and mildew spots. These adaptations make these animals difficult or impossible for a predator to identify or even notice, and so these otherwise defenseless creatures are overlooked or passed by. Other organisms defend themselves directly with stings or bites, or with poisons or other noxious chemicals, and such organisms often assume bold, characteristic colors and markings, called warning coloration, that warns a predator, reminds it that this creature can inflict pain or discomfort, or that it tastes very bad. The bold orange and black pattern of the common monarch butterfly, or the black and yellow bands on a bumblebee are such warning colorations. And sometimes this warning coloration is so effective that another species, a species that doesn't have any of the protective devices of sting or poison or whatever, will adopt the same warning colors and pattern. This sort of mimicry is called Batesian mimicry. The name comes from the early zoologist H.W. Bates, who back in 1862 first suggested an explanation for the origins of mimicry based on Charles Darwin's new theory of natural selection. This was one of the earliest applications of Darwin's ideas to an unknown biological phenomenon. Now, viceroy butterflies taste good to many birds, but because they mimic the monarch butterfly's model's color pattern, because viceroy butterflies look like monarch butterflies, they are avoided, just like the monarch is. In the same way, many harmless fly species resemble the bumblebee model, and also in this way they avoid being eaten by the recipients, birds. So these are Bastian mimics. There are several conditions that must be fulfilled, though, for a Bastian mimic to be successful. The mimic must, of course, share the same general region and habitat as its model, but the mimic must also be less numerous than its model, which must be relatively abundant. That way, the odds are that the recipient predator will sample an unpalatable model first, which is very important for keeping the trick effective. A similar kind of mimicry is Mullerian mimicry, named after another early biologist. And in this sort of mimicry, both the model and the mimic are dangerous or taste bad. A very obvious example is the way that so many unrelated species of bees, wasps, and ants have assumed similar, bold, black and yellow or black and orange banded patterns. By doing this, Mullerian mimics present a united image that predators soon learn to be weary of. There's also another aspect of mimicry that I'd like to mention too, and that's the mimicry used by predators. This is called aggressive mimicry, and it is used to conceal or misrepresent a predator until its prey comes near enough to capture. Many mantids, for example, are green or brown, so that they blend in with their plant surroundings. But some tropical mantids are fantastically shaped and colored, like the beautiful orchid mantis, which resembles a petal of one of those tropical flowers, and it hides motionless next to one of these orchids until an insect comes within its reach. There are also several green-colored vine and grass snakes of various families, which lie invisible among the tangled vines and branches of the jungle until they suddenly lash out to grab their prey. Actually, there are an endless number of ingenious mimics in the natural world, and I recommend that you all try a Google Images search tonight for some more interesting examples of this fascinating behavior.
Right? So animal biology is something that, to be honest, you're gonna see a lot in the TOEFL test, including like in their, you will see it in the reading, listening, speaking, and writing sections, specifically listening and speaking. So it's very important that you start like expanding your vocabulary on animal biology as well. But let's take a look at the questions. In this case, what type of organizational style did we have? What was the lecture about, first of all?
Well, he was talking about animal behavior, the way that animals use different techniques and devices to protect themselves or survive or even pass their genes.
Exactly. But one specific technique, right? What's that called? Animal mimicry, right? That's the technique they use in this case. So mimicry basically consists in an animal imitating something else, imitating another animal or imitating part of its environment. And we had a classification, right? Because we have different types of mimicry. How many types did we have? We had 4 different types, right? Camouflage, Bayesian mimicry, Mullerian mimicry, and aggressive mimicry. And as you usually do when you have classification, they show you the type, let's say camouflage, they describe what it is. So camouflage is this and this and that, and they give examples, right? So an example of camouflage is this specific animal. So if you understood the style of the lecture, then your note should be organized, right? You have one type, definition, example, another type, definition, example. Maybe some concept in the beginning, and that's it. Let's see. The first question says, why does the lecturer mention Charles Darwin? What do you guys think? Look at your notes. Maybe you have anything related to Charles Darwin.
Letter B.
Okay, letter B.
I agree
Is-
with that.
Do you agree? Okay. Anyone else? Do you guys all agree? Okay, so yes, first of all, option A, totally out of context, right? It may be true that he was the creator of evolutionary theory, but we know that this lecture was about mimicry. So everything here in the lecture has to be related to mimicry somehow or the other, right? So the reason why the professor mentioned him is because he was somehow associated to mimicry. So option A has nothing to do with mimicry. We could eliminate it. Now, he separated Bayesian and Mullerian mimicry. I don't think so, because that was mentioned later. He explained mimicry for the first time. Like, that's just the details, right? In this case, he didn't. His theory was used to explain mimicry, but he wasn't the one that explained it. So yes. Now, the second question has to do with the concept in the beginning. It says, what is the term used for an organism that is fooled by mimicry? What do you all think?
The recipient?
The recipient, okay. You guys agree?
The model.
The model, okay. So remember, mimicry is basically an animal imitating another animal to fool, to trick a third animal, right? Or not necessarily imitating another animal, right? It could be imitating anything. So the animal that does the mimicry, the animal that imitates, is called the mimic, right? Now, the thing that the animal is imitating, as you might guess, is obviously going to be called the model, right? Because the model is basically what the animal is trying to imitate, right? So the model couldn't be the answer because they are asking for the one that is fooled, the one that receives the mimicry, that receives the action. And that is the recipient, right? The receiver of the action. So the mimic imitates the model in order to trick or to fool the recipient of the mimicry, right? So yes. Now question 3 says, why does the lecturer mention katydids? Why does the lecturer mention katydids? What would you guys say? Do you guys know what katydids are? Remember that when we have classification, we have different types of something, their definition, and the example, right? So do you at least remember when this was mentioned? When were katydids mentioned? Was it as an example of camouflage, as an example of Bayesian mimicry, Mullerian mimicry, or aggressive mimicry? What was it an example of? It was an example of the first one, right? Also, just by looking at the order of questions, we have some questions before about the main concepts in the beginning. So, if you had to guess, let's say that you guys don't know the answer at all, right? Like you don't know exactly what this is. So if you had to guess, then your best guess would be to say that katydids are examples of the first type of mimicry. And the first type of mimicry is camouflage. If you understood the context, you know that camouflage basically means an animal camouflaging in its environment, right? So the only example here that is of an animal camouflaging in its environment would be option D, because katydids camouflage in its environment, right? In their environment, they look like leaves. So they blend in with their environment. The other ones are related to the other types. But if you guys had to guess, then try to go in order. Let's say that this first one, because the other ones were about the first parts, right? The origin of the mimicry, the main terms, the definitions in the beginning. And then when they start talking about the examples, then the first example is probably going to be for the first subtopic. And the first type was camouflage, which is basically an animal blending in its environment. In this case, the only one that refers to camouflage is option D, right? The other ones are about the other types. Now, if you know what katydids are, you know that they actually look like leaves, right? They're like grasshoppers, like saltamontes, right? They look like leaves. So if you had to guess, go in order, try to make it make sense, and use your common sense as well. Now, question 4. Micaela, can you please read the fourth question?
Some moths and butterflies have large, owl-like eye spots concealed under wings, which they can suddenly display to a predator. Which kind of mimicry is this an example of?
Okay. So what do you guys think? So they can suddenly display to a predators, right? These moths and butterflies, they have the eye spots on their underwings, and when a predator comes and attacks, they can suddenly open their wings and display this to the predator. So what kind of mimicry is that?
Letter B.
Camouflage, okay. Do you guys agree?
Letter A.
Letter A, okay. So yes, I would actually not go for options B or D because, I mean, well, if you know the answer, you know it, right? You know that this is an example of Bayesian or camouflage, then go for it. But if you didn't know and you had to guess, then go in order, as we said, right? So if we analyze this, then the previous question was about camouflage, right? So I don't think you're going to have questions for the same. The next one is Bayesian, but it could also be Mullerian, right? Because you don't know if you'll have a question for Bayesian or not. And aggressive mimicry was at the end, so I wouldn't choose that either if I had to guess, right? If you guys are completely guessing. But if you know the answer because you have it in your notes, because you remember, then go for that. In this case, let's go for A, because I do believe that it may be A, but I'm not totally sure. And finally, question 5 says, I'm sorry, the second to last. Which organism is presented as an example of Mullerian mimicry?
Letter C.
Okay. The monarch butterfly. Do you guys agree?
Yes.
Okay. But remember that the previous question, we said that butterflies were an example of Bayesian, right? So I don't know, but we're going to see, I guess. Look at how the questions go in order, right? Camouflage, Bayesian, Mullerian. And finally, we have question 6 that says, which would be the best title for this lecture? What do you guys think?
Letter B.
Animal creativity, letter B, you said? Yes, is it B?
I would say D.
The animal escapades, okay. I mean, it's not like they're creative, right? Because they're not really creating anything. So I don't know about that. Now, escapades, like it is true that most of the time, animals that we've seen in the lecture use mimicry for escaping from their predators, right? But there was also the last type of mimicry, which was aggressive mimicry, that animals use in order to catch their prey, right? So I don't know if escapades like includes everything. We know that this is about animal mimicry, right? So what's the closest one to animal mimicry? What is mimicry? What would you guys think? So creativity, okay, let's choose B and let's see what happens. Now we're gonna check our answers. So, let's see. The first one was correct. His theory was used to explain mimicry. The second one, the recipient is the one that is fooled, that receives the action. Now, katydids, as I told you guys, are mentioned as examples of camouflage, right? Of the first type of mimicry, because they look like leaves, because camouflage has to do with that, has to do with an animal blending in its environment, looking like something from its environment. Now, question 4, Bayesian mimicry was right. Question 5, it wasn't actually the monarch butterfly, but it was the orchid mantis. So as I was telling you, right, if you had to guess, this question was already about the butterflies being examples of Bayesian mimicry. So for Mullerian mimicry, they probably had a different example. In this case, the orchid mantis. And finally, as for question 6, animal deception would be the best title according to this. Because deception means engaños, right? And mimicry is to fool somebody, to fool another animal. So animal deception is the one that's closest to animal mimicry, right? To fooling somebody, to fooling someone. So I know that this one is a little bit subjective because we could have chosen animal behavior, right? To be honest. But it's not an official site. So we don't have to worry too much about having these type of questions. But the other ones, I guess that what I could tell you is make sure that if you guys don't know the answer, you guess, right? You don't just get stuck. You need to guess and you need to move on. You need to also be able to understand the structures of the lectures. Remember that if you have a classification in the lecture, then it's going to be types, definitions, and examples. So you should be very actively paying attention for the types, the definitions, and the examples, That way you're not gonna miss anything. And remember that the questions go in order, right? So it's very likely that you will have one question per subtopic, and that will also give you a clue on what option to choose, right? Because as you can see, we have the different types: camouflage, a definition, and examples. We have the other type, which is, I don't know. I don't know if they mentioned what it is. Bayesian mimicry, right? We have the definitions, and we have the examples. We have the next one, which is Mullerian mimicry. Again, an explanation, some examples, and finally, mimicry used by predators, right? Which is called aggressive mimicry. And same thing, a definition and examples. So what do you guys think up until now? Do you guys have any questions, any comments before we go today?
In the actual test, we're going to have only 30 seconds for each question, right?
I mean, you have an average of 35 seconds per question, but I mean, it's up to you, right? It's not like they're gonna be, you will have a separate timer per question. You will just have one timer for the entire listening. So it's up to you how you organize it. In order for you not to run out of time, then it would be ideal if you can spend, as an average, 35 seconds per question. But obviously, there are going to be questions that maybe require more thinking, that require more thought, and that will take longer, and others that you'll be able to answer fast. So it should be around 35 seconds, right? Not necessarily that exact amount.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sure. Any other question? All right, guys. Please then, before you go, don't forget today's daily survey. And I will be seeing you all next class on Tuesday, right? Tuesday. We'll have our next class.